First things first, thank you to everyone for getting me across 12,000 subs. If you haven't subbed yet, well, you know what to do. Next stop, 1 million. Let's go. I attended the 2023 Shanghai International Auto Show on the very first day that it was open to the general public, which was this past Thursday, April 20th. I would imagine that there are already plenty of videos and articles giving impressions of every particular car of interest, so while you'll definitely see some cars in this video, I mostly won't be giving reviews of them here. Instead, I'm going to be giving you some general impressions of the auto show, what I noticed with regards to what seems to be trending, how in this crowded market some brands are trying to differentiate themselves, what brands seem to be the most popular, as well as some other observations as we go. As mentioned, I attended the auto show on the first day that it was open to the public. I entered right at 10 a.m., which was right when the doors opened. I wanted to get there at open on the first day because, by my estimation, these would be the most enthusiastic attendees and they would have specific ideas in mind with regards to which brands or which new vehicles in particular they wanted to see first. These are the car enthusiasts. The new exhibition center was massive and I got a little bit turned around and lost initially. I wanted to start my day off at the NIO booth. I finally got there at around 10:30 a.m., but this was okay because it gave me a good lay of the land early. And I got to see that initially, most of the booths around the convention center were still relatively sparsely populated. However, around 10:30 when I got to the back corner with NIO and Zeekr, it was completely different. Both NIO and Zeekr were full of people, so it seems that these were most people's first stop, not just mine. I spent the most time at these two booths, but I did actually take a few laps around the convention center, and from my perspective, the most popular of the Chinese brands were BYD, Zeekr, and NIO. They were all very crowded every time I stopped by, and probably the car at the show with the most attention surrounding it was the Zeekr X. It looks like a compelling product and it has a killer price. The auto also had quite a crowd when I visited, which makes sense considering how popular they've been lately and their sales have been doing very, very well. However, they didn't have anything new on the floor, so that's probably why they weren't quite as full as some of the other car companies. Xpeng and Hi-Fi seemed to be a bit less popular, although the new Xpeng Model Y competitor attracted quite a decent crowd when they presented it. BYD has also recently introduced their new luxury brand called YangWang, and it had a very small booth footprint, but it had massive lines just to get into the booth and to get a first-hand look at the cars. I unfortunately had to skip that line, and I just looked at it from outside. The YangWang cars looked really, really cool. They looked interesting, but at the price point, it's obviously not going to be massive volumes of cars being sold once they launch. But as you can see by the interest in the brand at the auto show, people are interested in YangWang and they're taking note of it. Another new brand is Yuanhang. It's kind of the opposite from YangWang, even though their names sound a little bit similar. So there were a few curious observers in their booth, but overall it was probably the Chinese brand with the least amount of foot traffic from what I saw across the entire show. When it comes to non-Chinese automakers, Porsche and Audi were probably the two most popular. Porsche had a massive line to get in, and Audi doesn't have a line, but it has probably the biggest booth out of all of the exhibitors, and it was completely packed to the gills. While Chevy, Cadillac, and VW saw okay interest, not super crowded, and then Mazda was probably the most dead that I saw out of any major foreign automaker. An interesting thing that I noted was in how such a crowded automotive market, different brands try to differentiate themselves. NIO, of course, leans heavily onto the entire ownership experience, from battery swapping. They have a battery swap station at their auto show booth. They also really celebrate their joyful, carefree lifestyle. They emphasize the exclusivity of the NIO houses, and they place a great value on the community coming together through art, activities, and more. Most brands at the auto show would of course have their cars on display, and then maybe at most offer some other benefit like a coffee or an ice cream, and you guys might have seen the ice cream controversy. I'm not going to get into that. NIO's booth, on the other hand, had the entire NIO experience on display. NIO is very clearly trying to sell you a lifestyle and not simply sell you a car. It is also quite clearly being sold as a global product, with European designers spotlighted, user artwork on display from global users, and things of that nature. On the other hand, in the BYD booth, it seems that they really pride themselves on being an extremely Chinese brand. Even as they expand their footprint globally, they still have the same kinds of dancers that show up to perform and entertain crowds at events all across China. Like, if you've ever been to the 17th annual Anhui Nongming Cucumber Festival, you'll see the exact same dance on some stage in the middle of nowhere, just like that. And then you've got Aura, who are really leaning into their position as a brand for the young, modern Chinese woman. Their cars were decked out in flowers, evoking a romantic, feminine wedding car feeling. Unlike NIO, where attendees could enjoy a coffee and snacks and a nice quiet lounge surrounded by art, at the Aura booth, attendees could get body art painted on their arms. They can create arts and crafts and little jewelry things. I don't even know. There was a bunch of different tables for girls to take part in activities. Of course, men could do it as well, but I didn't see any men taking part. From what I could tell, they didn't have anything specifically for a traditionally masculine customer. I'm not saying that men can't be feminine or do body paint or whatever. I'm all for everyone being whoever they want to be. It doesn't bother me, but it was very clear from Aura's booth design and their activities, and let's be frank, many of their car designs, that their demographic is the young Chinese professional woman. Even in this era of heightened tension between the US and China, the American brands are still very focused on selling the Americanness of their brands. Chevy had a recreation of Old Faithful here at the auto show, and a lot of other little touches that remind you that Chevy is an American iconic brand. While at the Shanghai Hongqiao airport, so not specifically at the expo, but Shanghai, Cadillac had a display for the Cadillac Lyric, which included a sign that said something about Alaska and had a fake snowy wilderness scene. They're really selling you Americana. These companies are still counting on America as a brand specifically that's being worth something. However, sales in China would probably mostly tell you otherwise. When it comes to NIO's new cars, the ES6 and the ES8, they both look like great additions to the NT 2.0 platform product line, although you couldn't really get too close to either of them. Thankfully, I could get into the EC7, which appeared to be a huge improvement over the NT1 EC6 that I used to own. The seats were super comfortable. Some of the materials that were used in the car were different from the ET7 and the ET5. Especially noticeable was in the center console. Around the cup holders and the mobile phone charger, there's no more of the rattan texture there, but what they did replace it with felt great to the touch and it looked very good. So no complaints from me with regards to that change. Overall, it seemed that the attention to detail throughout the new model was great, even going so far as to include blue sky coming underneath the spoiler. I also did get a chance to talk to Qin Lihong, the NIO president and co-founder at the auto show. He didn't divulge any secrets to me or anything like that, but we did have a nice 5-minute conversation. It's always nice to see him or to see William Li at events like this or at NIO Day, for example, and that they always remember who I am, they remember my name, and they make it a point to say hi when I'm around. This is a very small thing, but it goes to show that even from the top level, the leadership at NIO does really find it important to be a part of the NIO user community, and it isn't just lip service, but they do care about their customers. So with regards to what's trending here in the auto market in China, from what I can tell is many cars, many brands, they seem to offer very, very similar products and very, very similar experiences. These electric cars here in China all seem to be converging into I would say one or two kind of styles or one or two kind of looks. And so there's not really that much to differentiate them. Honestly, from my perspective, some of them definitely do need to die. Some of them, they don't really have a purpose to exist. I talked about earlier in this video how some of these brands are trying to position themselves in different ways to make sure that they do carve out that niche. On the other hand, some of these brands, you walk around their booth and you look at their cars and they're basically interchangeable from every other car around. It seems to me like the trend last year, from what I had seen at the Shenzhen Auto Show, was always more screens. Li Shang has 3 screens, basically a wide screen across the front. And Hi-Fi had more screens back then, and in their Hi-Fi X, and a lot of other cars would be adding more and more screens. And now that seems to have changed to, instead of adding more screens, these companies are now adding screens that move around. Of course, Zeekr X moves from the center to the passenger. You've probably seen the Hi-Fi Z, which has the screen that can dance around and shake and shimmy and do all that sort of stuff. You've seen BYDs that can move from horizontal to vertical and back. That really seems to be the current trend. There's screens that come up and down. It's everybody has a screen that moves now, and that's the most prominent trend here. Who's to say what's going to happen next year? Is it going to be more screens again? Is it going to be moving screens in the back seat? Is it going to be something completely different? Everybody has LiDAR, everybody has 100 kilowatt or 90 kilowatt hour battery, and they can produce 600 kilometers of range according to the Chinese standards. Cars are becoming faster to charge. It's all converging into basically the same product, so you have to differentiate it somehow. That's my real takeaway from this auto exhibition. Some of these brands just need to die, or they need to do something different because they have no reason to exist. So that's all from Shanghai. See you next time. Bye bye.